Hello, everyone. I want to talk a little bit more about operant conditioning and B.F. Skinner's theories about operant conditioning. He actually discovered that when we reinforce a behavior, that oftentimes it's best not to reinforce it every time. And so he also came up with this idea of shaping different behaviors and also different schedules of reinforcement and what's the most reinforcing. So he was considered a radical behaviorist, and he wasn't necessarily the most popular guy at the time. He studied mostly rats and pigeons, and he used this Skinner box to really study the animal's responses. Skinner believed that all of our behaviors are determined by conditioning or by rewards and punishment. And that's one reason why it wasn't too popular. We don't like to think of ourselves as being completely controlled by conditioning or by others, and or that we're just like animals as well. He designed the Skinner box to study animals, and he studied primarily pigeons and mice. So in this Skinner box, there's this little lever here, and it's a pretty simple box. The lever, if the mouse presses the lever, it would either get food or water. And rats also could learn there's a light here. So rats could also learn that when this light is on, that there's food available, and that when the light is off, that the food is not available. So when we're acquiring an operant response, when we're training an animal or even a person, but Skinner basically trained animals, mice and pigeons, they learn pretty quickly to expect that certain responses will have a certain effect, and they can have a certain effect at certain times. So the mouse can learn that when that light's on, there's food. The mouse might learn just every time I press the lever, I get food too. So Skinner would say that most of our behaviors are based on operant conditioning, and it's true that we work towards rewards and we avoid punishment, just like the mice. And we can change behavior by using reinforcements and punishments. Skinner believed we behave exactly like the animals do. So Skinner came up with this idea about shaping behaviors and shaping an animal's behavior. So he was trying to teach pigeons here how to play ping pong, and he was actually successful at it. I'll show you a short little video clip of it. But that's not something pigeons really know how to do or would really understand how to do. If you put these pigeons in this little arena here and put the ping pong ball in there, they might not pay attention to that ping pong ball at all. So what he did was he rewarded them for each step in the process of playing ping pong, and that's how he was able to shape their behavior and get them to play ping pong, which is not a normal thing that a pigeon would actually do. So you have to find a behavior that the animal is physically capable of doing, and then reinforce that behavior with food or whatever is reinforcing to that animal. So pigeons learn quickly that their pecking is rewarded with food. And so what he did was, as he put the ping pong ball out there in front of the pigeons, as soon as they paid attention to it, he'd give them a treat. And after a while, he would only give them a treat when they started pecking at that ball. So pretty quickly, the pigeons put those things together and realized, hey, if I peck at this ball, I will get a treat. And then after a while, he wants them to push the ball. So he waited until they actually pushed the ball with their head before he actually gave them the reward. So now they have this ability, this behavior of pushing the ball that they didn't have before, and that they can use to play ping pong. So after he's gotten that behavior, taken those 3 steps to get that behavior. Now he can put these pigeons in the ping pong ball arena and actually see how they can play ping pong. So I'm going to show you this real briefly here. But it's pretty interesting that they're able to actually do this and actually understand that if they get the ball past the other bird, that they can actually get a treat. And you'll see how excited this pigeon is when he actually gets the shot that gets the other pigeons. So now he's getting his food there. So, it's a real game to these pigeons, and they have a great time doing that. So that's shaping behavior. And we do that with our dogs too. So we might teach them to sit, then we teach them to stay. We might teach them to get down and then to roll over. That's all shaping behavior. So you start out with a behavior they already know how to do, and then you add on to that behavior to get a bigger, more complicated behavior. And that is shaping. So the other thing B.F. Skinner came up with was schedules of reinforcement, that we don't have to reward every time. And so the schedules are planned plans for when we are actually going to reinforce a behavior. And if you think about it, when you first train your dog to sit, you do give them a treat every time, and that's called continuous reinforcement. And new behaviors are learned more quickly with continuous reinforcement, but once they've got that behavior down, you don't have to give them a treat every time. And in fact, if you don't give them a treat every time, it actually is much more resistant to extinctions. And you don't have to give them that treat. So they've already learned that behavior. So the partial reinforcement effect is that things that are learned through partial reinforcement are much more resistant to extinction. So if we look at the slot machine here, we know that we're not going to get a reward every time we play the slot machine. So we don't get upset when we don't get a reward. But if we expected to get a reward every time and we weren't getting one, we'd give it up pretty quickly. So the mouse in that Skinner box, if it presses the lever and every time it gets food, and then all of a sudden when it presses that lever, there's no food there, that mouse might just decide that it's not working anymore. I'm not going to get that anymore. And it might give up pretty quickly. However, if sometimes when it pressed the lever it got food and other times it didn't, it would keep checking back. It would keep checking, just like we do when we're at the slot machine. We keep checking, we keep hoping that we're going to get that reward. So here's some examples of two different schedules of partial reinforcement. We're going to talk about ratios and we're going to talk about intervals. So ratios have to do with the number of responses. So you can have a certain number of times that the rat needs to press that lever before it gets a reward. And that's called a fixed ratio schedule. So if you think about it, ratio means the number of responses, fixed means it's fixed. You set that number. So it could be 3 times, it could be 5 times, but it needs to be the same. It needs to be fixed. So each time that rat presses the lever 3 times, it should get food. That's a fixed ratio schedule. Now, a variable ratio schedule means exactly that. That means that there's a variable number of responses that that mouse or that pigeon has to give before it gets food. So at one time it might be 3 presses, another time it might mean 2 presses, and sometimes it might just mean 1 press. And this is much more resistant to extinction and much more addicting than the fixed ratio schedule. They both produce pretty good responding, but this one keeps the animal guessing, keeps the person guessing too, just like the slot machine. So here's a real world example of what a fixed ratio schedule is like. So, and we see this all the time. So at Dutch Brothers, you buy 10 coffees, you get the 11th one free. Produces high rates of responding. Pizza places do this all the time. You get 10 pizzas, you get the 11th free. So you're much more likely, if you want a coffee, to go to Dutch Brothers. If you want a pizza, you're going to go back to that pizza place. So it really does create loyalty because you want to get that 11th free pizza. Dutch Brothers also has this sort of variable ratio plan where sometimes they will pick a car in the parking lot waiting in line and give that whole car free drinks. And what that does is first of all, those people that got those free drinks feel pretty good about it. And the next time that they go to Dutch Brothers, they're going to be like, hey, I'm going back there. Just on the off chance that they might get picked again. People that are around them there that notice that they got a free drink will also be more likely to go back to Dutch Brothers. And all their friends that they've told that, hey, we got free drinks today. So everybody's going to be trying to go to Dutch Brothers and get a free drink, right? So it's really makes it much more addictive the more variable the responses are, the rewards are. But this is a fixed ratio, and the fixed ratio produces pretty good rates of responding. A variable ratio is that the number of times you have to hit that lever or number of pizzas you have to buy just depends every day. It changes all the time, which is not good. But it does produce high rates of responding. So baseball is a really good example of a variable ratio schedule. You could go up to bat 10 times and never get a hit, or you could go up 2 times and get a hit. You just never know when you're actually going to get that hit. And the same thing with the slot machine. You never know when you're going to win. So very addictive. Anything that's variable is much more addictive than something that's fixed. So now we're going to talk about interval schedules of reinforcement. And this has to do with how much time has passed before you actually get that reinforcement. So if you think about it, so a fixed interval schedule has to do with, it's fixed and it has to do with a set amount of time. So reinforcement is given after a certain amount of time has passed. So we get a paycheck every 2 weeks. Grades are given at the end of the semester. So you might get a paycheck every week. And if your boss said, well, maybe it's going to be 3 weeks this time, it'll be 5 weeks another, you wouldn't be too happy about that. So that's a fixed interval schedule. We know when we're going to get that reward. You have to wait to get your final grades until the end of the semester, but you know that that's where it's coming. Token economies are a form of operant conditioning where secondary reinforcers are used to control behavior. You probably had this experience at your own elementary school where your teacher gave you play money, your tickets, as reinforcers for good behavior during the week. And then at the end of the week, you could exchange that play money for prizes. And it's more effective because you don't have to give a physical reward every time, and the child actually learns a little bit of delayed gratification. So that's a fixed interval schedule. So you know every Friday you get that reward. A variable interval schedule is you don't know how much time is going to pass before you actually get that reward. Fishing is a really good example of that. You could go out fishing and catch something in 20 minutes. You could sit there for hours and not catch anything. If you call a doctor's office and you get placed on hold, you don't know if it's going to be 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 2 minutes. Could be a lot. If you posted something and you're waiting for some responses from your friends, it could be, hours before they respond. It could be immediate when they respond. You just don't know. That's why it's variable. And variable, of course, is very resistant to extinction, and it produces slow, steady responding. So this is an operant conditioning scenario. So Mrs. Bloom is a first grade teacher. She has a system rewarding her students for good behavior. They get tickets during the week, and then on Fridays they can exchange their tickets for prizes and candy, which probably isn't true anymore. Candy's probably not allowed. So what type of reinforcement is this? Positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement? Well, it's positive because we're actually adding something. We're adding the candy and the prizes. The secondary reinforcer is actually the tickets. And the schedule of reinforcement is a fixed interval schedule because you get rewarded every Friday. So here's another operant condition scenario, and this is something we're all really familiar with. You get into your car, you turn it on, and that buckle your seatbelt sign flashes until you actually buckle your seatbelt. And that annoying sound and flashing light goes away once you buckle your seatbelt. So what type of reinforcement is this, positive or negative? It's actually negative reinforcement because we're getting rid of that annoying beeping sound when we buckle up. And what's the schedule of reinforcement? This one's a little bit trickier. So when you buckle your seatbelt, this annoying sound stops. So you're negatively reinforced, and you're reinforced every time. If you buckle up and your seatbelt, if that light still goes on and the sound still happens, then you got a problem with your car. So definitely don't want that. So this is the final slide in this, and it's kind of thrown in here, but there's a question on the quiz about it. I usually cover this in the cognition chapter, but this is talking about a psychologist named Tolman, and he came up with this idea that we have cognitive maps. This little mouse, he studied mice, and he put little mice in this maze, and what he discovered was that the mice actually learned the maze even though he didn't really reward them for that behavior. But he said that we also have these cognitive maps in our minds. We have a map of what GCC campus looks like if you've been there much. If you haven't been there yet, your high school, you probably have a really good picture of where everything is in your high school. There's a map of campus in your mind. There's a map of your house in your mind, right? So we have these cognitive maps that we can sort of reference when we're going somewhere. We need to know where something is. We know where things are around town as well too. And so what he said was these mice actually learned the maze, but they didn't demonstrate that they had learned the maze until he offered a reward to them. So they seemed like they were not doing a whole lot. They were just wandering around the maze. But as soon as he put the cheese in there, the mice learned really quick how to get to the end and get that cheese. So that's called latent learning. The mouse actually learned it, but didn't demonstrate that it had learned it until the reward was actually presented. So that's the end of this one.